I was watching a movie last week, lights off, phone face down, the kind of watching where you're actually present. Then a scene came on. I remember physically pulling back from my screen, not looking away, just creating distance, like an extra inch of air between me and what I was seeing would actually help. When it was over, I sat there and thought, did people actually do that to each other? So I went looking, and I genuinely wish I hadn't, because not only was it real, it wasn't even close to the worst one. It wasn't in the top 5, it wasn't in the top 10. What I found underneath it was something so deliberate, so engineered, so disturbingly patient that I had to stop reading multiple times. And I never stop. This is what I found: hanged, drawn, and quartered. So the first thing I want to talk about, and I'm starting here specifically because I think it's the one most people have at least heard of, is hanged, drawn, and quartered. And I know what you're thinking. You've seen this referenced before, maybe in a history class, maybe in a movie. It sounds almost routine when people say it: hanged, drawn, and quartered, like it's one thing. It wasn't one thing, it was 5. Performed in sequence, in public, with an audience. Here's what actually happened. The condemned was tied to a wooden board, flat on their back, and dragged through the streets behind a horse, not as transport, as the beginning of the punishment. The cobblestones did the first work. By the time they arrived at the execution site, they were already bleeding. Then they were hanged, but not until death, until the edge of it, just long enough for the body to start shutting down, so then cut down while still conscious. Then came what the records actually called the drawing, the castration, performed while alive, the intestines pulled out and burned in front of them, each organ removed one by one and held up for the crowd. This part, and I want you to really sit with this part was designed to be slow, and the whole point was that the person was still present for as much of it as possible, then beheaded, then the body cut into 4 pieces, the quartering, with each part sent to a different city and displayed publicly. London Bridge, city gates, wherever the most people would see it. What I keep coming back to, what I couldn't stop thinking about when I first read through all of this, is the crowd. Because this wasn't done in secret, it wasn't hidden. People lined the streets, they watched from windows, vendors sold food, and the government didn't just allow it, they required it. The display was the point. The body parts sent to different cities were a message, a deliberately distributed message, designed to be seen by as many people as possible. This wasn't rage, this was policy. And we're just getting started, Rat's Cup. I want to ask you something before I get into this one. Think about the last time something completely outside your control happened to your body. A bad fall, a sudden illness, a moment where your body did something and you couldn't stop it, regardless of how hard you tried. Remember that feeling of helplessness? That specific panic that comes from losing control of the one thing that is entirely yours. Hold that feeling, because that's the entry point for this one. The Rat's Cup. The setup is almost laughably simple. A metal bucket, a rat, a fire, 3 things that individually mean nothing. Together they become one of the most psychologically annihilating methods of punishment ever designed. Here's how it worked. The victim was restrained, completely immobile. The metal bucket containing a live rat was strapped directly against their bare stomach, sealed tight, no gaps. Then a fire was lit on top of the bucket. Now think about what happens next from the rat's perspective, because that's actually the mechanism. The rat is trapped in a sealed metal container that is rapidly heating from above. It is panicking, it cannot go up. That's where the heat is coming from. It cannot go sideways. Metal walls. There is only one direction available to it, through. The rat began to burrow, not because it was trained to, not because anyone directed it, simply because it was a frightened animal looking for the only exit available. and the exit was the person underneath. What makes this different from almost everything else on this list is that the executioner didn't have to do anything after the initial setup. They stepped back, they watched. The punishment administered itself through pure animal instinct meeting human anatomy. The victim felt everything, every movement, every decision the rat made in real time, and they could not move, could not intervene, could not stop what was happening inside their own body. I've read accounts that describe victims going completely silent at a certain point, not unconscious, silent. A specific kind of silence that witnesses apparently found more disturbing than screaming. I think about that detail a lot. There's a variation documented in parts of South America. I'll let you look that one up yourself because even I have a line. But the core principle is the same. An animal, a container, a direction of travel, and a human being with nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait. The body that was entirely yours, suddenly shared. That loss of sovereignty over your own physical self. I genuinely believe that's a specific category of horror that sits above simple pain. Pain you can try to endure. This you cannot endure, you can only experience it. And we haven't even reached the halfway point of this list yet. Boiling alive. I want to tell you something that I think gets lost whenever people talk about this one. Everyone assumes boiling alive is quick. It isn't. And the people who designed it knew that. In fact, they specifically engineered it to be the opposite of quick, because there were two versions of this punishment. And the difference between them is the difference between someone who understood basic physics and someone who understood exactly how much the human body could be made to endure before it finally gave out. Version 1, the victim was lowered into already boiling liquid, oil, water, tar. Depending on the region and the era, this version was brutal and fast. Painful beyond description, but mercifully short in duration. Version 2 is the one I need you to actually think about. The victim was placed into the liquid first, cold liquid, room temperature, comfortable almost. They were restrained inside a large container, submerged from the waist down or fully immersed depending on the account, and then the heat was applied gradually from beneath, slowly. The reason this version was considered significantly worse, and I want you to follow this physiologically because it matters, is about nerve response. Your body has a threshold for heat, a point at which the nervous system registers danger and begins shutting down surface sensation to protect itself. If you introduce extreme heat suddenly, that threshold is crossed fast. The body responds. Shock arrives relatively quickly. But if you heat gradually, if you bring the temperature up degree by degree, the nervous system keeps recalibrating, keeps registering, keeps reporting, because at no single moment does the temperature jump far enough to trigger the shutdown response. It just keeps getting worse, incrementally, continuously. Your fingers and toes go first. Maximum nerve density. The pain there is immediate and specific and overwhelming before anywhere else on your body has even registered the temperature change. Then the skin begins to separate from muscle. Then the fat layer beneath starts to liquefy. Then the muscle tissue itself begins to cook from the outside inward, while the internal organs, still intact, still functioning, begin to feel the heat arriving from the outside in. The whole time the person is conscious. Henry VIII legislated this specifically for poisoners in 1531, not just permitted it or wrote it into law, created it as a category. Richard Rose, a cook who was accused of poisoning a household, was the first person executed under this law at Smithfield. Chronicles from the time record that he roared with such volume that spectators became physically ill and had to leave. They stayed long enough to record that detail though, and here's the thing that I sat with for a long time. after reading about this. It was still being used in 2002, not in medieval Europe, not in ancient Rome, in Uzbekistan, under a government with officials present against suspected terrorists. In the year 2022, the year the first Spider-Man movie came out, the year the euro became physical currency, the year most people reading this were already alive. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because the entire framing of this video, the idea that these are historical punishments, things that happened before we knew better, starts to crack when you look at that date. And it's going to crack further before we're done. Sawing. I'm going to tell you something before I describe this one. When I was going through my research for this video, reading through account after account, taking notes, trying to stay clinical about it, this is the one that made me put my phone down and just sit for a minute. Not because it's the worst on this list. It isn't. We still have two more after this, and each one escalates in a way I genuinely didn't think was possible when I started. But there's something about sawing that got under my skin in a way the others didn't, and I think it's because of one single detail, one specific decision that whoever designed this made, a decision so precise, so coldly intelligent, that it still bothers me to think about how someone arrived at it. Let me build up to it. The basic method is what it sounds like. The victim was sawn in half, vertically, starting from the groin and moving upward through the torso. A large two-handled saw, two executioners, one on each end. On its own, that is already an almost unthinkable thing. But here's the detail. Before the saw touched them, before anything else happened, the victim was hung upside down, suspended by their ankles, completely inverted, head below the heart, and they were left like that long enough for the blood to fully redistribute. Now, I need you to understand why that matters physiologically, because this is the part I couldn't stop thinking about. When you're right side up and something catastrophic happens to the lower half of your body, trauma, blood loss, extreme pain, your brain protects itself. Blood pressure drops in the brain. Consciousness narrows. You begin to lose awareness. You pass out. Your body removes you from the experience before the worst of it arrives. That's the mercy switch I mentioned at the beginning of this video. The one wired in by evolution. The one the people who designed these punishments spent so much energy trying to disable. Hanging upside down disables it completely. With the body inverted, blood floods the brain continuously. Oxygen supply to the brain is not just maintained, it's increased. The very mechanism that would normally allow consciousness to retreat is overwhelmed in the opposite direction. You stay awake, fully awake, completely present, aware of every single thing happening to your body as the saw begins its work from below. The cut started at the groin and moved upward, through the pelvis, through the abdominal cavity, through the organs, each one encountered in sequence, each one announcing itself with a different quality of sensation that I am not going to describe in detail because I think you already understand what I'm telling you. Documented accounts from medieval Europe and Asia both describe victims remaining conscious well into the process. Not just at the beginning, well into it. The inversion kept them there. And the thing I keep returning to, the thing I sat with after I put my phone down, is how deliberate that decision was. Whoever arrived at this method didn't stumble onto the inversion by accident. They understood enough about how the human body manages consciousness under trauma to specifically engineer around it. They knew what happened when you didn't invert. They knew the problem that created, and they solved it. That's not cruelty born from rage or ignorance. That's applied knowledge pointed at a human being. What I will tell you is this: every punishment from this point forward required its victim to be alive for longer than this one did, and the people who designed them knew exactly what they were doing. Two left. Ling Chi. I need to tell you something about how I found the worst version of this one. I was hours deep into research at this point. I thought I understood the shape of what I was dealing with. I thought I had a reasonable sense of what human beings were capable of designing. Then I found the mercury variation, and I closed my laptop and made tea, something I have never done in the middle of research before. That's the weight of what I'm about to tell you. Ling Chi, death by 1,000 cuts. The Chinese name translates more accurately as slow slicing. And that translation is more honest because it removes the poetry and replaces it with something clinical, accurate. This was a formal legal category in Chinese imperial law, not a battlefield atrocity, not something done in secret or in anger. A codified judicial sentence reserved for the most serious crimes: high treason, multiple homicides, killing a parent or master. Crimes the system considered so severe that ordinary death wasn't considered sufficient. The goal was not to kill. The goal was to stay as close to the edge of death as possible for as long as possible without crossing it. Every cut was calibrated, deep enough to be unbearable, shallow enough to preserve the body's ability to keep experiencing it. The skill, and I keep using that word in contexts that make it horrifying, was in that balance, in knowing exactly how much the body could absorb before shutting down and staying just inside that line. In one variation, the executioner worked from a set of marked knives, each corresponding to a body part: left forearm, right thigh, left foot, neck, drawn randomly. The randomness was deliberate. The victim couldn't brace or anticipate. Each cut arrived without warning from a different place. The final knife had a heart on it. When it was drawn, the session ended. But the mercury variation is what I need to tell you about. The victim was buried up to their neck. A cross-shaped incision was made at the crown of the skull. The flaps of skin were peeled back, then mercury was poured into the wound. Mercury is 13 times heavier than water. It moves with purpose. It travels between layers of tissue, between skin and the connective tissue beneath it. The weight of it separated skin from flesh as it moved. The victim was buried loosely enough to move, and the survival instinct kicked in. The overwhelming biological need to dig free, to push upward, to get out. As they struggled and fought against the earth, the mercury moved with them. The accounts describe victims who eventually freed themselves and left their skin behind in the hole. I'll let that sit for a moment. One left, and I've been thinking about how to introduce it since I started writing this video. Nothing I say is going to prepare you, so I won't try. Scaphism. I want to take you back to the beginning for a second. That movie scene that started all of this. Me pulling back from my screen, creating distance, thinking, did people actually do that to each other? I found my answer. I found it segments ago. And then I kept going. Through everything on this list, through every method and every account and every detail that made me stop and sit with it before continuing. And this is where it ends. Scaphism. The word comes from the Greek scaphe, meaning boat. And the name tells you the setup. The victim was placed between two boats, or two hollowed wooden vessels, sized to fit their body. Holes were cut to allow the head, hands, and feet to protrude outside. The two halves were fastened together. The person was sealed inside from the neck down. Then the force feeding began. Milk and honey, large quantities, enough to cause immediate severe diarrhea. The waste had nowhere to go. It stayed inside the vessel with them. The same mixture, milk and honey, was applied to every exposed surface. The face, the hands, the feet, every part of the body still accessible to the outside world. Then the vessel was placed on a stagnant pond or slow lake and left there. The mixture on the skin attracted everything: flies, wasps, bees, insects of every kind that lived near water. They fed on the exposed surfaces and began to breed inside the vessel, where the warmth and waste created conditions they found ideal. The daily force feeding continued. Every morning the vessel was brought to shore. More milk and honey administered, more applied externally, then returned to the water. This was done to keep the victim alive, not as mercy, as the entire point. The only documented account names the victim as Mithridates, a Persian soldier condemned by Artaxerxes II around 401 BC. The historian Plutarch recorded what witnesses described at the end. Mithridates survived 17 days. By the final accounts, his face was entirely obscured by insects. His flesh had begun to rot while he was still breathing, gangrene moving through tissue that was still alive and still capable of registering what was happening to it. The interior of the vessel had become its own ecosystem, alive with things feeding on him. From the inside, he was conscious for most of it. I've read everything on this list. I've sat with every method and every account, and I keep coming back to the same thing about scaphism that I can't resolve. It required maintenance. Someone showed up every morning, administered the feeding, applied the mixture, returned the vessel to the water, went home, came back the next day. That was somebody's job for 17 days. I started this video because a movie scene made me pull back from my screen. I'm ending it the same way.